absolute value is measuring how far something is from 0. It's distance from 0. And distance cannot be a negative number. So with absolute value, whatever you put in, it becomes a positive. When we are solving equations, we need to remember a couple different things. So if I said the absolute value of x equals 5. Okay, what that means is on a number line, x is 5 units away from 0. So what could x be? Either a positive 5 or a negative 5. So when you solve it, you set it equal to the positive and the negative. We get those two answers. Okay. If I said the absolute value of x is less than 5, what that's saying is on my number line, it's less than 5 units from 0. Okay, we know equal to 5 is here. Everything less than 5 would be where? Everything between negative 5 and positive 5. Do we agree with that? So if it's a less than, when you went to rewrite your problem without absolute values, you typically wrote it as negative 5 less than x less than 5. Okay, so we would write it as that inequality, and then we could solve it from there. So it's everything between those. And now we would write our final answer with an interval at the end. If I said greater than, so if the absolute value of x is greater than 5, what would that be? It's saying it's further than 5 away from 0. So it's everything out here and everything out here. So it's less than negative 5, greater than positive 5. Or at the end we would write our interval and we get two pieces. Alright, in algebra you probably heard her say like and or. If it was a, did she say like less than is an and? Kind of went crazy there. Did she use that trick to help you guys? So less than and. So your solution was between two. It was one big compound inequality. Both of them had to be true. When it was a greater than, that was an or. So you had two separate statements. Our solution is two separate pieces at the end. Alright, so let's just solve some problems today. I can do as many or as few as we need. Let's just see what we remember, and we'll go from there. I want to do a couple equations first. So I asked you to solve the equation. The absolute value of 9 minus 4x is equal to 7. How would we write that? We have to set up a problem we solve, right? If the absolute value is equal to 7, that means the thing in here could be 7. Or could be negative 7. And we're going to solve both of those. So if I subtract over my 9, divide by negative 4, over here if I subtract my 9, divide by negative 4. I get positive 4 and positive 1/2. Can we check both of those? Yeah, if you plug them in, 4 times 1/2 would be 2, 9 minus 2 is 7. And then 4 and 9 minus 16 is negative 7, absolute value is positive 7. So if it's just an equation, you are getting those two answers. Positive 1/2 and positive. What if I put absolute values on both sides? Does that change anything? So it could be that both of these numbers are the same to start with. The absolute value of 5 equals the absolute value of 5. So the first equation, you just drop the absolute values and set them equal to each other. Or it could be that they're opposites. The absolute value of 5 is equal to the absolute value of negative 5. So what you do is we drop the absolute value, and we have to do the opposite of one of these. So the opposite of that entire side. Just like before, we did equal to positive 7 or a negative 7. Here, it could equal the x minus 5 or it could be the opposite of x minus 5. Now we solve it. So if I subtract my x, subtract my 2, divide. Over here I would have to distribute my negative. Add over our x. Subtract over the 2. Does it bother you guys if I'm not showing my steps, like when I'm adding, subtracting? You guys are okay with that? Alright. So I get my two answers. Could I check them? Absolutely. You just plug them back in and make sure it works. So on those absolute value equations, we typically get two answers. Not always. There are situations where we have to be a little more careful, but typically. Do we need some more like this one, these? You guys remember doing those in the past? Let's try a few inequalities then. Alright, the big thing to remember, whether it's an absolute value equation or inequality, before you make it two separate pieces, you have to get that absolute value by itself. So the very first thing I do on this problem should be what? Add the 1. Okay, so now the question, is this an and or an or? Or, great or. It's more than 5 away. Okay, so we do two separate pieces. I guess I should ask, is that how you guys are used to doing it, or did she do, I mean, technically you could also do it like this. Do you guys know which way you did it last year? You don't remember? Okay, then I'm going to roll with what I started. So, great or is an or, two different pieces. So, at the end, I will most likely have two separate pieces, two separate intervals. So if I solve these, subtract my 2. When I divide by my negative 7, what happens? And this one, subtract our 2. Whoops. Alright, if you think about, oh, hold on. What did I I failed to do when I wrote this first time? I didn't flip my inequality on my other one, did I? Should always flip it on that next one. So then when I divide by my -7, it flips. So I have this. Okay, so when you're doing your two separate inequalities, the first one you drop the absolute value, just write it. Second one, you drop your absolute value and flip your inequality. And I caught my mistake at the end because I knew this was an OR and I should have my pieces going two separate directions. We think -3/7 is down here, x is less than that. 1 is up here and x is greater than that. So my answer, -infinity to -3/7 union 1 to infinity. So saying any number smaller than -3/7 or bigger than 1 would work. All right. What's first step? All right, is this an and or an or? And less than is an and. That means we make one big inequality. So you put the -8 less than the 5 minus 8x less than 8. Because it should be, since it's an and, just in between two numbers. So then we can subtract our 5. What happens when I divide by -8? Flips all those inequalities. So I get 13/8 is greater than x is greater than -3/8. Okay, if you don't like how that's written, you can always flip it around. So that means -3/8 is less than x is less than 13/8. So x is bigger than -13/8, or -3/8 smaller than 13/8. So your interval at the end is just in between those two numbers. If I switched it to an equal to, what would change? Like if it were less than or equal to, we would get brackets instead of parentheses. So that will make a difference in how you solve the problem. So have to remember, if it's less than, it's an and, so it's in between the two, one big compound inequality. Great or than is an or, so you do two separate inequalities. Okay, I don't know how much you remember. Do we need more like this? You guys remember doing these? Okay. Let's do one more slide that I want to go through. A few more problems. All right, it's an equation. How do we solve the equations? What do we normally do for the equation? Set it equal to the positive and the negative. Okay. So first one, we would always just drop the absolute value. Second one, we do the opposite. But what is the opposite of 0? Still 0, so we're only going to get one answer. by 7, so we get -4. That is the only answer here. So it's possible. I told you most of the time you get 2 answers. It's possible to not get an answer. What if I'd said, like, the absolute value of x equals -5? It's not possible. Absolute value has to equal a positive. So it's possible to have a no solution on these if you have absolute value equal to a negative. Alright. If I look at this one. So and or. Or. It's a great or than. So how do we solve this? What did we do on those in the past? 2 separate ones. Okay, so one of them, you just drop your absolute value. The other one, you flip it and make it negative. So 6x minus 9 greater than -2. Or 6x minus 9 is less than, the opposite is +2. So I get 6x is greater than 7. X is greater than 7, 6. Or x is less than 11, 6. Think about what this says. I told you that if it's an or, you should have 2 separate pieces, right? Greater than 7, 6. We're starting here going that way. Less than 11, 6 is starting here and going this way. What gets covered on my number line? Everything. Why did that happen? It was a negative. Absolute value is what kind of a number? Positive. How often is a positive greater than a negative? Always. Do we have to solve that to notice it? No. So if your absolute value is on one side and you have a negative on the other, stop and think about it. Now if it's just an equation, that wasn't possible. But if I'm asking you when is absolute value bigger than a negative, that's always. So you could have just said negative then be positive. But if you didn't catch it, we solved it. It was an or statement. So we will take everything that gets shaded. In this case, it was the whole number line. So now that we're thinking, if I said the absolute value of 2 minus 5x is less than or equal to -5. Does anyone know the answer without solving it? Why? Less than or equal to. A positive number smaller than or equal to a negative number. Can't happen. So this one is a no solution. If you worked it out, what would have happened is your solution would look like an or, where they went 2 separate directions, but it was an and statement, so we really needed the overlap, and there is none. So if you have a negative on the one side, take a second and look at your problem. Do we need more problems? Okay, so I am done. I want you guys to do, I am going to take off the last section of problems. So 1 through 8 are magic questions.